time feels long, you you don't have as much of a sense of urgency to judge, um, and you can let things unfold in their own time. I think when time feels short, that's when people are basically economizing how they think about others, how they think about themselves. When you're able to say, "Gosh, it's been a long time since I was 18," uh, and it's going to be an even longer time from now until I'm 70.
Hey everyone, I hope everyone is doing good and taking good care of themselves. So, today we are exploring a fascinating and timely topic, that is implicit knowing, trustworthy science communication, and healing tech. In an age of information overload, how do we know what and who to trust? How do implicit wisdom, scientific credibility, and emerging technologies in healing come together to guide us towards genuine transformation? And I'm really thrilled and excited to be joined by Dr. Eric Smith, PhD, a respected researcher, author, and thought leader whose work bridges the world of science, communication, and human healing. Eric brings a unique lens to this conversation, helping us unpack how implicit knowing and trustworthy communication can shape not only our understanding of science, but also how we approach recovery and personal growth in a tech driven world. So, without any delay, let me welcome Eric. Eric, thank you so much for joining in today.
Hey, thank you, Sarah. It's good to meet you.
Eric, I had been using, let's start from there. I had been using, the time machine, and it's an amazing app. I don't know how it works. What is it, if you could just tell us? Let's start from there.
Sure. So the Institute for Love and Time creates technologies that are meant to sort of crack people open a little bit and break through some of the clutter of modern living, and often that means meeting people where they are on their phones. The app itself is meant to help people connect the dots between their past and their present and their future, so that they have a more coherent narrative about their lives. And there's a lot of evidence from folks like Jonathan Adler and Dan McAdams that having a redemptive self narrative is associated with all sorts of positive downstream outcomes, as opposed to having a narrative of, I think they call it contamination. So we're really interested in setting people up to be able to write a narrative that honors any sorts of trauma or anything that's coming from their past, but also helps them author something that is productive in the future and gives them the future that they'd like it to be. And it's also grounded in work by Philip Zimbardo, who is at Stanford. He just actually passed away a couple of months ago, but he has a lot of research on, his team has a lot of research on time perspective, and how having a balanced time perspective across the past, present, and future can also inform all sorts of downstream positive psychological outcomes and also societal outcomes. So the app basically is an audio journaling app. You can get to it at timemachine.love. Which gives you a little prompt when you get into your time machine. You start talking about how would you like to, what would you say to yourself as a child? Or do you have a message? What makes you feel hopeful about the future? Those sorts of things. You come back the next day, you listen to yourself with unconditional love. And that's something that is a muscle that takes a little bit of building. And then you get another prompt. And over time, you're having this conversation with yourself. And then once you've been in the app for, I think it's 6 days, then you get opened up into a community garden where you're able to plant seeds of hope, and you water each other's seeds, and it has like a social element as well.
In fact, I did talk about this with Julia also, and Julia was really thrilled that, oh, you're using this app, and that's how, we got in touch, and, we, came forward with this idea to have a podcast and explore the implicit knowing. Now, Eric, your research often highlights the subtle but yet very powerful role of implicit knowing, the kind of knowledge that arises, beneath conscious reasoning. Eric, could you unpack what implicit knowing really is from a cognitive and neuroscientific perspective, and why it matters so much in human decision making and overall well-being?
Yeah, sure. So there's different ways that people talk about it. There's sort of like different modes or different ways of knowing and stuff like that. And I think that's a conversation that's just opening up. So like how do indigenous cultures know the world through their ancestors and stuff like that. But typically when I think about implicit knowing, it relates to implicit learning and implicit memory. So there's work from researchers like Paul Reber and there's a whole literature on humans being able to recognize, they're called implicit correlates. So seeing patterns in the world that aren't bubbling up above your threshold of conscious awareness in many cases. But those patterns will lead you to an intuition or a spider sense of like, oh, that's a red flag. I can't say why, but it's a red flag. It's worth, maybe it's not correct because we make mistakes when we're just looking at patterns, but it's definitely something that's worth looking at when one of those red flags come up. We're so good at this as humans, much better than we are at sort of formal logical operations, and the implicit knowing is much faster, so it can be quite useful. I think my favorite example is they do stuff with categorizing snowflakes where they'll have people say, does this snowflake go into category A or category B? And you're like, I don't know. So you take a guess. And then you get feedback based on whether you're correct or not. And then you learn how to sort these snowflakes into the correct categories without even knowing why you're doing it. And then it's professionally valuable for people like they'll go from chicken farm to chicken farm, and their role is called a chicken sexer, and they'll look at your chicks and tell you if it's male or female. But there's no really strong markings that let you know if it's a male or female. You just learn it from being told if you're correct or incorrect. And these folks get paid quite a bit because of their implicit knowledge about baby chicks. I think it starts to apply to uh, our own health and our own well-being when we talk about how much do we weight scientific studies in the decisions that we make about our own health. And there was a guy, I saw a talk from him when I was an undergrad up in the Chicago area, and he was coming from the University of Wisconsin, where he had just started up an alternative medicine, complementary and alternative medicine program. And somebody asked him in the question and answer session whether they should drink milk. What study says whether or not I should drink milk? And he's like, oh, try drinking some milk and see how it makes you feel. and if it makes you feel really bad, then you shouldn't drink milk. So it's not to say that we shouldn't look at these studies, but those are more useful from a public health perspective when you're talking about the numbers game. When we're talking about ourselves, there's nothing more useful than the self knowledge that you have, even if it's contradicting some a scientific study. And that's basically when we talk about the ecological fallacy. Um, I see that being committed quite a bit in the public health space, where they'll say something like, "You have a 1 in 1,000 chance of getting of having an adverse event from this drug," or something like that. Uh, the correct way to think about it is in the population, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that anyone will. But when it comes to me or you, we have either a 0% chance or a 100% chance of having an adverse event based on all of our characteristics that have causal connections that would lead to either an adverse event or not. So it becomes a real issue when we start talking about um, who is going to be predisposed to having like a vaccine adverse event. Um, I think we could go a long way in communicating trust if we did a little bit of screening and embraced what I think 23andMe called personalized medicine. I think the FDA calls it precision medicine now. But if you can say, okay, it looks like this person has an aromatase deficiency or glutathione deficiency, and maybe we know that this sort of person is more likely to have an adverse event. Okay, we screen for that, and then people are going to trust that they're not just going to be this broken egg in this public health omelet that gets made and then like acceptable risk. So I think we could go a long way there, and also how we communicate certainty um, in the health space. There's lots of literature suggesting that if you communicate certain uncertainty in a competent, transparent, um, uh, committed way, people actually trust your messaging more than if you are trying to communicate absolute certainty all the time. And I think we saw that difference when we looked at like how a place like Sweden handled the COVID pandemic. They communicated a lot of uncertainty, but then they were able to get a lot more compliance from their population because everybody knew that the public health folks were doing the best that they could. So I would like to see a lot more uncertainty communicated.
Eric, many people think of knowledge. I mean, I was also there. You know, people, including me, I mean, my past version, I mean, view knowledge as something which is purely rational or somewhat evidence based.
Yeah.
But when we, talk about implicit knowing is something that challenges all that assumption and, understanding and, the way how we perceive and process things. I would want to know, how do you see implicit knowing interacting with scientific reasoning? I mean, are they in tension, or can they strengthen each other? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think they bootstrap one another, and I think it's the relevant variable is time. So how much time do you have to think about something? And this gets to like Daniel Kahneman's research about thinking fast and slow and that sort of thing. For the most part, our pattern recognition is strong. It's going to be a little bit risk averse. So this is essentially where you get stereotyping and prejudice, right? Because people will let's say there's this is controversial, but like you'll say there's a distribution of this race and a distribution of this race, and we're looking at violent crime rates or something like that, and the distributions are just slightly offset, right? So on a population level that matters, but on an individual level it would be very stupid of me to treat an individual differently based on that. And I think a lot of times our brains are doing that with pattern recognition as well. And then we tend to overweight these examples that we see in the media. So we need to really have a check. Like oftentimes those are going to get us to the right answer, but we also need to, when we have time, reevaluate our priors and our assumptions that we're using to recognize these patterns. Because I could, if I had avoided Black people or Jewish people or something like that in my life would not be nearly as rich as it has been, for sure. So I think it's really the pattern recognition in science I think of as a spotlight, because there's a million questions in a million different directions. It's like, where am I going to focus my attention? It's like, well, it seems like there's something going on around here. If that's where I left it, that would be bad science. But that's not where I leave it. That's when I start to bring in the rigorous tools of examining evidence and, observing the world, hypothesizing about it. The whole method is the most powerful thing, the most powerful explicit thing that I can even think of that humans have come up with. But I think it usually has to start with letting your pattern recognition direct the spotlight of your attention a little bit.
Eric, you've written about the importance of trust in science communication, especially in an age where misinformation spreads faster than evidence. What makes science communication truly trustworthy? And how can researchers out there avoid unintentionally creating more confusion, or you can say skepticism?
That's a really wonderful question. I think if we start by seeing what the sources of the problem are, one of them has nothing to do with scientists at all, and it's about media sensationalism. So a scientist will they'll put out a paper, and that paper has really strong boundaries, and here's our confidence interval that this is the effect that we found, um, and here are the limits to how much we can generalize it and stuff like that. It gets picked up by the media, and the media says uh, eggs kill you, that sort of thing.
Mm.
So, and then most people, I think, they don't go to that original source. So all they see is these back and forth. Eggs are great for you, coffee's bad, and that sort of thing. I think that really diminishes trust in science. So that's media, but I also think when we look at science communicators, uh, there's two issues. One of them is that there's extreme distrust from both the populist left and the populist right in the United States of elitism. So if I go out and I wear a bow tie and I wear a what is the stethoscope and stuff like that, so that people will trust my messaging, it's actually going to backfire on a pretty large percentage of people who would rather just have somebody who appears to be a normal person talk through difficult um, uh, concepts with them.
Mhm.
So I think that's an issue. Like how do we present ourselves? I think the other issue is really it's really certainty again. So arming people with information that they need to make good decisions on their own, and then we just have to trust that that they'll be able to weigh those risks and their benefits. And oftentimes people are really, really bad at weighing risks and benefits. Um, so part of that guidance, I think, can be here's how I would think about these risks and benefits. And I've had good doctors who have walked me through that sort of stuff, rather than just saying, this is what you have to do. This is my mandate. So it's made a really difference in my life. Like I had a knee surgery that didn't work.
Mhm.
I had my meniscus repaired, and it immediately tore. And I asked the doctor what caused it to tear, and he said, "Oh, it's just random chance. 1 in 1,000 of them don't work." And and then he rolled up a piece of paper and hit me in the knee with it, which is a strange thing to do, but it made me really concerned that there's people who I think get used to being in a position of authority, and
Mm.
they forget that they exist on the goodwill of their constituents. Um, the authority is only there if it's granted to them. So I think we have to be really, really aware of treating people like grown-ups. And maybe that's too much to ask. I don't know, but I think that would get to the root of the mistrust.
Eric, science has traditionally prized objectivity. Yet we know that human experience is shaped by subjectivity and implicit meaning making. Now, I would want to know, how do we reconcile the subjective dimension of implicit knowing with the objective demands of the science?
Yeah, that's a debate that's really going on in the university system now, where um, is my lived experience as valid as this rigorous scientific study? Um, I think again the answer is both. Both are very important. Um, I'd say the more a society moves towards a technocracy, like a technocratic state where experts tell everybody what to do, the more tension we're creating between these two ways of thinking. Because let's say uh, let's say there's a group of people who believe that germs cause disease and the germ theory of disease, and there's a group of people who don't. Uh, it's not really a problem until you smush them together, but they can't possibly coexist, right? Like you can't have
Mm.
people who believe in masking and people who don't believe in masking at the same grocery store. So I think the more that a society is voluntary, the less tension you have between those different philosophies. Um, right now in the university system, nobody's listening and everybody's shouting. So I think in order to get to a point where we can even recognize that both of those approaches are valid approaches and complementary approaches. Um, we need to at least be able to recognize one another's common humanity. And actually, so Tilt is working on a technology. It's a gazing app, which is essentially
Mm.
a
Yep.
level setting app where you get paired up randomly with another person who might be uh, on this side of the Mexico border or the other side of the Mexico border, or in Gaza or in Tel Aviv. And you have, but you don't know, and all you can see is their eyes, and there's no speaking. It's all just eye gazing, and you're paired up for a 2-minute session where you just gaze into one another's eyes. Uh, and this taps into what we think we know about empathy and oxytocin and mirror neurons creating conditions for rehumanizing the other person. So I think a lot of those tensions fall away once you respect one another as humans, and then you can start to see how the other person's way of thinking about it works. But I really think, like, even when we talk about, like, when we work with our tribal partners, uh, who, when you go into a situation like that, you basically find the elders, and the elders work with you on how are we going to build an experimental pilot, and they don't have science training. Uh, so we have to really find a good balance between, okay, here's what we would consider acceptable evidence, and what you consider, high quality evidence, and then you run a study, and no study's perfect, uh, and then you let it converge with a bunch of other studies that have their own misperceptions or
Mm.
inefficiencies and stuff like that. So I think we can still get at the truth, even even if we're using different modes of knowing. I would love there to be a common language where we are able to reconcile the two. Um, and maybe that already exists. Maybe that's what, like, ethnographies and stuff. Like, there are sciences that don't use um, randomized controlled trials for everything. So maybe they're the ones who sort of heal that rift, but I'm not sure, because I think people who want to present themselves as a hard-nosed scientist, uh, but maybe they don't know very much about how science works, will say if it's not a randomized controlled trial, it's nothing, and it doesn't count,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah.
which is also not good science. So
Mm. True. Eric, I have observed that, globally there is a lot of technological advancement, and still technology is advancing rapidly, whether it is, AI-driven health tools to neurotech. I mean, we are seeing a lot of things happening around, and, a lot of things are developing, research and, being injected in the society, in health industry and everywhere. But I have also observed that not all of the innovations necessarily serve human flourishing. I mean, it's a sad thing, but I mean, some are just there to innovate. I mean, that's my way of looking at it, to cripple us and be very dependent on it and never outgrow, from it. I would want to know, Eric, what criteria, according to you, should guide us when it comes to evaluating whether a new healing technology is genuinely beneficial and trustworthy, or we need to move on and look for some other alternatives.
yeah, that's another really good question. It's one that we grapple with as a technology nonprofit with a human flourishing motive. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when we make apps, as some of our technologies are apps, and the way that we think about it is that we just have to meet people where they are. Like, I would say, ideally, we're not contributing to people being on their smartphones more, but that's where people are already. So we're hoping that we can meet them there, give them a little shake, but also we design our apps purposely to be non-addictive. And I think
Yeah.
that's one step towards not exploiting the person who's basically co-creating this experience with you. We also don't we try not to talk about them as users, even though that's what all of our app metrics, it says user and stuff like that. But we find that we actually had a study where we were looking at people who helped co-develop the Time Machine app through a pilot. I would say the most powerful finding that we have in this study is that their sense of being part of developing the app um, was the biggest contributing factor to whether they had an increase in well-being. So I would like to see a move towards a collaborative model of app development, away from an exploitative, or even not, if it's not exploitative, away from like a creator user model. Um, I think that goes a long way to infusing the experience with meaning, which I think helps a lot of people on its own, even independent of the content of the app. Also, making sure it's not addictive, so we don't gamify things, which means that a lot of people aren't going to come back to the app. It looks like you already have sort of the discipline to repeat the use of the app over and over, but that's a tough thing to do. So every once in a while, we'll send a reminder. It's been a while since we've seen you. We'd love to have you come back and report something. And then the third thing that we do to make it non-exploitative is we don't sell any user data. We don't monetize it. One of the things that we are moving towards by having sort of user collaborators is we'd like to enable people to monetize their own data if they choose to. So if we tokenize their participation in the app, and then they're able to sell their data to like a health and wellness company who's able to correlate their audio journal data to how they're feeling on a certain day. That is really, really rich data, and we're just sitting on it because we don't use it for anything. But if you tokenize people's participation use of the app, then you could give them basically shares of any revenue that was generated by selling the data, and then you get a network effect because the more people who choose that, the more valuable the data become, and then you have users supporting one another, and then it becomes an income stream and not just a well-being tool. So those are the ways that we're thinking about making it non-exploitative. I think the love conversation is especially fraught with exploitation right now when we talk about technologies, because the dating apps are basically designed to fail. If you go out and you meet your life partner and you get married, then you're not a repeat user of the app. So the incentive structure is all wrong for dating apps to be productive, unless that's what people are seeking is just like one night. That's got its place, I'm sure. But yeah, you don't want essentially repeat encounters coming out of your dating app. So one of the things that we're thinking about is how do we reframe the conversation around what love is and what are our expectations around love, and that's something that we're trying to build. I can't talk too much about it because it's in motion, but we're working with 38 studios. They're a really wonderful thought leadership design studio on how can we not only be creating technologies, but how can we go out there and change the conversation about love, so that it's not transactional, so that it's not commodifying yourself down to all your attributes, but it's something more reverent, I guess we would think. So that's in flight. So if you give us 2 months, you'll see the results of that.
Wow. Eric, some of your work bridges philosophy of time, love, and scientific rigor, which is a fascinating triad, according to me. I was just, exposed to the dark triad and psychology, but, looking at your work, it's an amalgamation of these three things. Now, I would want to know, in your view, how does our understanding of time shape implicit knowing, and what role, that plays in both healing and when it comes to human connection?
Yeah, it's a good question too. First, I'll say like my only reluctance about being a part of this organization, Love and Time, is that it seems like dark triad folks are probably the most likely people to start an organization that makes them like look like they're. So I'm like, oh my God, are people going to think I'm a psychopath if I work with an organization? So of course we're not all psychopaths. I would say none of us are even. But yeah, so how does time lead to the healing part? I think part of it is when time feels long, you you don't have as much of a sense of urgency to judge, um, and you can let things unfold in their own time. I think when time feels short, that's when people are basically economizing how they think about others, how they think about themselves. When you're able to say, "Gosh, it's been a long time since I was 18," uh, and it's going to be an even longer time from now until I'm 70. That true? Yeah, it's true. Um, it, I think it it can help a person be more compassionate towards themselves, and they see that they've changed quite a bit in the past, and that they'll change quite a bit in the future, and it helps us give ourselves permission to change, because we also have what's called consistency motivation, where the people around us really don't like when we change for the most part, uh, and they'll sort of trap us. There's a quote by Arthur Rambo called "I is someone else" or "I am someone else." And I think it's super true that a lot of our concepts of who we are get they're basically expectations rather than senses. So being able to feel like you've got time to unfold as a person, I think, is really really healing. I also think just I think about New Year's resolutions, where
Mhm.
once a year you say that me was bad and this me is going to be better. And then the next day you're back to normal. I don't think it's an effective strategy.
Mhm.
I think it's a more effective strategy to say that me was doing the best he could um, from his own state of consciousness. And I wish for myself in the future to continue uh, uh, that my consciousness might uh, unfold into something even better and better, and I will do as well as I can tomorrow from the state of consciousness I am in tomorrow. So I think it's more of like an intent, and I think a lot of that intent is the intent um, to take care of the past, present, and future versions of us inside of us. I hope that gets it's a tough question to answer, but I hope that gets at it.
Mhm. Eric, I have personally observed when, people lose trust in either the institution or the expert, they often fall back on intuition, sometimes wisely and sometimes dangerously. Now, I would want to know, how do you think we can help those folks and the usual folks discern when their implicit knowing is reliable versus when it may be misleading or gaslighting them or jeopardizing their personal safety?
Yeah, I don't think you do it combatively. I don't like if we say if you don't believe this, then you don't believe in the science. Uh,
Hmm.
that leads them to say, well, I guess I must not believe in the science, and that generalizes, more. I think
Yeah.
the more we can make it specific, the better. And I
Mhm.
think we can say, um, if if what you're saying is true, then we should expect to see X, Y, and Z. Let's see if X, Y, and Z are happening. But I think like getting that small commitment, like if this is true, would you expect to see X, Y, and Z? Yes. And then they're part of this um, collaboration with you that is a truth-seeking collaboration rather than a making them feel dumb collaboration. Uh, also, so I try to practice this as much as I can on my side. Also, when I do practice this on my side, I find that people do often have valid concerns um, if I'm able to understand their underlying moral foundation. So I found there's a psychologist named Jonathan Haidt uh, who looks at different moral foundations, especially as they cross political lines. And he's got this really wonderful book called The Righteous Mind, which is a summation of a bunch of research that he's done. And I after reading that, and then just looking around, because I live in a rural area where there's Trump supporters, there's cowboys, and there's hippies, and there's Kamala Harris supporters and stuff like that. But looking around and applying what I learned from his work, it makes it really hard for me to uh, hate anybody, because I can see how their underlying moral drivers are leading to perfectly reasonable conclusions. Um, so I think the more conversations we have with people that feel collaborative, and pulling people into the scientific process of, a lot of people don't. A lot of people go. They find their. Actually, I think everybody does this, but we have to buffer against it. People find the solution that they want, and this as psychoanalyst, like they'll find the solution and they will rationalize everything they need to get to that solution. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I do it all the time too. It's just like I have to catch myself. Um, and I think the more we can interject that in a kind way, uh, that feels like a problem that we all, sort of a sin that we all commit, um, and then help sort of walk people back from that using just collaborative pedagogy. If this, then we should expect this, this, and this. Do we see this? I think that's going to be a lot more effective than uh, here's a mandate, uh, and if you don't follow it, then you're bad. I don't think that's going to be effective.
Eric, I personally love technology, technological advancement, and how, technology is, getting in every domain and every field. And I mean, I personally feel technology can extend our capacities to an extent. But I mean, on the flip side, I have also observed it can also mediate and distort our experience of reality. Certain apps, I mean, certain games, it's very addictive. It is literally, controlling you at a neural level, at a neurological level. It is really creating that disbalance. It really, forms that addiction. So those are the two sides, when we look at technology. I would want to know, do you see healing technologies as something that amplifies implicit knowing, or as a risk, I mean, as a kind of risking, replacing it with artificial cues? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's one thing that we're grappling with as well, where we're trying to. Are you familiar with the Matrix? Where you've got
Yeah.
the character Morpheus, who basically
Yep. Yep. Yep.
comes into the computer and
Mm-hmm.
shakes Neo out of
Yep.
his stupor.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I'm thinking about the technologies that we're developing. That they're meant to give people a shake so that they look around, or they have an interaction with another person on the technology, and it reminds them that there's people on the other ends of on the other ends of their phones. What we're really trying to do is to create sort of a flywheel where we are giving people a little bit of a shake in the digital setting, and then we're giving people real world um, settings that they can participate in. So that, because I think not everybody, that's silly. A lot of people are seeking more human connection, and it's hard and scary. So we're trying to create some cracks so that light can shine in and have people look away from their phones and then seek a real world interaction that supports them. And I know there's a lot of hopes that this can happen in the digital space with virtual chat rooms and avatars and stuff like that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think that can actually satisfy. Like I love virtual reality stuff. I haven't been on it lately, but I've got my base station tracker up here, and
Wow.
I really like being able to jump into a game where I'm playing with some 60-year-old guy in England and like an 18-year-old kid in Jamaica,
Wow.
and just talking while we play. I find that I love that experience. And
Mm-hmm.
you take so in social psychology they find that if you really want to reduce um, racial tensions and prejudices and stuff, you give people a goal to work towards, and by the time you've collaboratively reach that goal, everybody is now in your in group. And I think there's a lot of potential for games to cut across some of those social categories and put people um, into a common goal scenario where they're coming together. So I think there's a lot of promise there. I don't think it gets you to what is it like to actually feel somebody else's presence in a room. Um, so I think we do still have to connect that. And there are communities like what was the one? World of Warcraft. It was an old like multiplayer community, and there was a serious addiction problem there. But there were also these communities that popped up where they would go meet in real life, and the two characters would get married in real life. So I think the
Wow.
more that we can bridge between the
Mm-hmm.
digital and the analog, like I think there's a lot of potential there. So I'm definitely not one who says that it's that digital technologies are the devil and they need to be avoided at all costs. I think there's definitely some room to do some bridging.
Mm-hmm. Eric, as a psychotherapist, I have often seen how people just know things in their body long before they can articulate them. They feel it. It's in them, you know. Their gut says them, you know, they have that gut feeling, you know, it's
Yeah.
in them. Whatever you call it, precognition, I mean, however you want to view it. From your perspective, Eric, how does implicit knowing manifest in our healing process? And can technology be designed in a way to support it? I mean, our healing
Yeah.
rather than overriding it. What are your thoughts?
Um, yeah, I think that's so. This is where, I grew up in rural Arizona where the boys weren't supposed to have feelings. And you
Oh,
basically, internalize everything and it becomes stuff that, oh, why does my lower back hurt and stuff like that. I've been really, really fortunate to have gone through, a couple of different flavors of psychology training, and I have a partner who's able to recognize things in me. Is like, why is your eyebrow doing that? Like, oh, okay,
wow.
you have something you want to talk about. So that's
Mhm.
really, really helpful. And maybe that's something that AI can do, right? Like where it's able to read your face and then say, maybe we should talk about this or that. Um, I think the other promising technology, and I think this is one of the most promising, is biofeedback. So we had a couple of neurofeedback and also heart feedback and sweat feedback sensors in the lab I was working with at Northwestern University. It was Satoru Suzuki and Marcia Grabowecki's lab, and they were interested in can we become more aware of what's going on with our bodies using technology. And that's where I was able to really um, notice that when I think these thoughts, my heart rate variability gets out of whack, or I start to
Mm.
have a stress response with my galvanic skin response or skin conductance response.
Mhm.
Um, so I really think there's a lot of potential in biofeedback, and the cool thing is you can gamify biofeedback, where you had people like the Journey to Wild Divine creating games that were based on, can you maintain uh, high arousal but low heartbeat? Can you maintain low arousal but high, like things that you shouldn't really be able to separate, but you can train yourself into it through these games? I think that really, really um, put me in a space where I was more aware of the signals that I was getting from my body. And just being aware that I have a nervous system because I'm a human and we have to take care of our nervous systems. Uh, I like I know it's kind of early stage research, but I like the research on vagal nerve stimulation. I think there's probably a lot of potential there. It needs to be fleshed out. But if you can kind of hack that, that could be useful. I find cold plunging makes me a lot more aware of what's going on. And when I'm sitting in the cold plunge, emotions will come up because I don't have the capacity to push them down. And then I can see how they're connected. I think there's probably a role um, for psychedelics as well, and connecting the body and the whatever we want to call it, our emotions, and pinpointing where those things are. So I think there's a lot of things on the horizon that I'd like to see the science catch up to them, but I'm hopeful, because if we don't, then we're just people tapping our phones, like, and especially for boys, like there's definitely, basically all the violence problems come from boys from 16 to 24 who aren't able to tap into any meaning in their lives, or have any sort of rite of passage into manhood. And I think it gets manifested in a whole bunch of very destructive ways. And I think we're seeing that uh, in the political arena right now. And I would love it if we had technologies that could help boys experience themselves better.
True. And regarding the boys thing, I would like to add over here, I have observed that in my country as well. Like, I mean, I don't want to, make any kind of a generalized statement, but I mean, majority of the toxicity, comes from boys and exactly that age group that you mentioned. And I personally feel the root cause and the reason is not having healthy role models and not allowed to experience and express all range of emotion.
Yeah.
So you can't cry, you can't do this, you can't do that. Boys are not supposed to do this. Boys need to be tough, they need to fight. I mean, boys come in all variety and shapes and sizes. They are boys. I mean, why do we have to put them in box? I mean, I'm sorry, but I have seen in the Western culture, I mean, they want to put it in box. I mean, it's not, that it's evolving. They just want to put it in box. Like mind is a box, and you just develop till this age, and then that's it. You're all sealed. Now nothing can go in or nothing can come out. So I think that model doesn't really work when it comes to human. I think humans need to experience anything and everything, and that's what enables their evolution. That helps them experience themselves as human. Otherwise, they just become shapeshifter. They see something and they start mimicking, and they start acting in those ways. They start idealizing things which is nowhere possible. They start idealizing, and they start in a way worshipping individuals who they can never become, and who in the process of becoming they are going to lose their own authentic self. So
Yeah.
I think men, I mean, the reason why I do see a lot of them being very toxic and dysfunctional is because they are suppressed. I don't think patriarchy works in their favor. I'm sorry to say that, but it actually hurts men the most rather than anyone else.
I agree. I think it's a good short-term strategy for training warriors, but I don't even think it's a good long-term strategy
Mm.
for training warriors, because they don't have any resilience, and then they come back broken warriors. But for all the effort we put into training young men, their bodies and their skills, they don't receive very much guidance at all on how to work with their emotions. And that's, I know, and it's so true that it's kind of cliche even to say it, but like, and maybe we are predisposed to being able to push down emotions or something like that effectively,
Yeah.
short term.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
also, I know for a fact that it's not impossible to learn how to work through your emotions. And I think the danger is, if you're a sensitive boy, the question now is like, am I actually a boy? Or of course, like, of course you are. You're just a sensitive boy. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, it's something that gets squashed down. I see it all the time. Like, I've got a boy and his friends.
Mhm.
It's just, you're penalized for feeling. So I think
Oh
you're right.
God.
There's no pathways. There's
Mhm.
no pathways to learn how to master those skills.
Mhm. And I mean, you talked about this cold plunging.
Yeah.
I would like to add something over here. In fact, I mean, with a lot of research and study that I engage in, I started engaging in sensory deprivation, those sensory deprivation tanks. I mean, like
Oh, wow.
extreme buoyancy, that salty water, and I mean, pitch black, and you're just floating.
How's it
And
working?
strangely, it did actually, enable me in a lot of ways that I had never ever imagined. I started developing remote viewing capabilities. I don't know. I mean, how? I mean, I used to have flashbacks, or you can say precognition, but not exact remote viewing.
Right.
And then I started playing with random numbers, and then, I mean, the way how, your that app, time, the app that I use, just a second, I'm forgetting the name. I mean, that I use daily. Time machine. Time machine also talks about emotional state, spiritual state, and I mean that's how we, do, remote viewing also. Our physical state, emotional state, then we drop down the pen, and then a number is given, and then we start visualizing, and we start sensing things, we allow ourselves. So my bit to whatever you said was, sensory deprivation did help me activate certain senses in me, which
Yeah.
was inactive, which was very haphazard. I did not know what it was. Why am I getting these kind of visions? Why am I getting these kind of feedbacks? But yes, I mean, after that exposure, definitely, I developed interest, and I started doing it, and it does work, I mean, with 80 to 90% accuracy. So I mean, yeah, it does activate. I mean, for everyone, things are different. I mean, something might activate something in you that might not activate the same thing in me, and it can be vice versa. So yeah, I mean, that was my bit that I wanted to add.
Did you have any fear come up from just not having any stimulus?
I would say the feeling that I experienced with my first session in that sensory deprivation tank, it was very, I would say, euphoric. I mean,
Mm.
initially it was very, I mean, I would say I was very claustrophobic. That's how it started. I was feeling very claustrophobic. But after a period of time, I started feeling, extreme exhilaration. I started feeling extremely excited. And I don't know, I started seeing things, not with my eyes, but with my mind's eyes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, uh, initially, yes, there was fear. I mean, a little claustrophobia, all dark. But then I started enjoying it. And now, I mean, after a year, I mean, of being regular with it, I mean, we have created a setup in our place. I mean, after regularly doing this, I mean, sensory deprivation, me and my husband, um, we feel the difference, and it doesn't scare us anymore. We don't feel out of control or scared, but every session, we are back with a lot of new things. I mean, new visions, new thoughts, new abilities, new way of looking at things. I don't know, I mean, it can be altering, or it can be triggering, because we are so dependent on these five senses. I
Right.
mean, in a way, I personally feel that it handicaps me at times. I fail to use the faculties which are supposed to be used by humans, but I'm so handicapped. I just want to rely on these basic five
Yeah.
senses and
Yeah.
not use anything else to navigate. So it's just like a couple of minutes back we were talking about our dependency on technology. It in a way handicaps us. It in a way takes away the motivation. Let me just rely on technology.
Yeah.
But it can work in favor, it can go against also. So I mean, it's nice. I mean, I have become a better student. I mean, ever since I started getting into these things, my remote viewing capabilities have increased and enhanced, and I think I have become a better human. I mean, only till the time I was unable to tap into, the other layers of myself, the other dimensions inside of me. I think that was the time when I was feeling, "Oh, what a worthless crap I am." I mean, I had a traumatic background. So, all that gaslighting, all that abuse, trauma, it really shapes you, the way how you even look at yourself. And when you disconnect, it's almost like a disconnect from the usual sources, that helps you shape your perception. that enables you to perceive and process things. All of a sudden, you're getting rid of it and you are just there in a kind of a limbo or stasis.
Yeah.
And then, I think the new roots of, perception, branches out, and then it extends all those stems and branches, it extends, and then you start feeling things in a different way. And I think that is, that was something which was my, you can say a kind of a turning point, evolution. I mean,
Oh,
still evolving, but let's see.
I'll have to try it out. I tried one of the anechoic chambers down in Sierra Vista, Arizona, where there's
Oh,
it's no sound can bounce back to you. It's like completely quiet,
oh,
like pure
wow.
quiet. Uh,
Hmm?
and I think I probably would have gone crazy in there if I'd been in there for more than 10 minutes, because every time you move your arm, you hear skeleton noises, like a ship, but like all your tendons and stuff. Like that's how quiet it is. And I think it would be a lot, but you would adapt to that. So
Yep.
yeah, no, that's really interesting. I've got to try one of these sensory deprivation chambers.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, initially we were scared, but first my husband, said, "You start off with it. I'm not going to jump into it." I said, "Okay," and I started seeing changes. I started processing things better.
Hmm.
I mean, it maybe it helps us. I mean, these kind of understanding, these kind of treatment and therapy, it helps us to use our other faculties, which we don't use, though we are born with it. I
Yeah.
mean, that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, our brains are so plastic. When I'm looking at a 6x4 box, like even what's the impact of that, like on your visual system, where
Mhm.
it's going to adapt to be really high resolution here in this little chamber, and then you're going to lose sensitivity in your peripheral vision and stuff like that. So, yeah, and definitely, I definitely use vision and sound, and I for most of the day, and I barely use any of my other senses. So I have to definitely, at the end of the day, really do a sensory shakedown with some yoga or something. Yoga? Did I say yogurt?
Mhm.
Yoga. Yeah.
Yoga, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eric, I would also like to know, what are your views on implicit knowing, precognition, and remote viewing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that stuff. So Julia Mossbridge is the co-founder of Tilt, and she's currently the chair of the board, and she works a lot in these areas. Uh, I think they are very, very interesting areas, and I think there's findings that we can't explain using the frameworks that we have. Uh, I think a lot of people, if there's not a framework, they'll reject the evidence. Um, I don't. I'm okay with not having a framework that works for everything. It's like um, I know that we've actually been talking to these guys who have a company that makes apps, and I think it's called Tangled or Entangled, but they do a lot of work with the random number generator stuff, where you think about making ones or zeros, and it biases that, and that's the stuff that was coming out of Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory 20 years ago. I think that stuff is really interesting. It looks like there's something there for remote viewing. The Gonsfeld studies, which is basically one person looking at an image or a video, and then they're the sender, and then another person is uh, asked, out of these four things, which one they're looking at, and they perform better than chance, pretty reliably. So there's something going on there. I don't have an explanation for it, and maybe it's just an artifact of something in the experiment. Like maybe it's not real, but it's such a big deal. I can't imagine anybody just discounting it because they don't have a framework for it. So I'm open. I'm open to any rigorous, high quality attempts at answering those questions. But then I'm also open to maybe science isn't able. So I mean, science. In order to answer a question in science, you have to accept some assumptions about time moving forward, and causality
Mhm.
being that arrow of time. And if you're going to say this causes this, like you have to make those assumptions. Um, I don't know that those are. I don't know that those are accurate assumptions to make. So if we drop those assumptions, then it makes a lot of room for implicit experience that can never be explained through science. And I think the worst thing we could do to a person is to deny their implicit experience without evidence. Um, I think we could say we don't have evidence to generalize your experience to the population um, or to a framework, but a person's experience is their experience, especially if it's useful. So let's say remote viewing performed so well that you could use it to find criminals or find lost submarines or that sort of thing. Then I would say there's three sort of ways of thinking about the truth. There's one is that it's internally consistent, which is makes logical sense, and that's kind of like the weak form of truth. There's the idea that truth means that you're corresponding to something in the real world, uh, which would be the ultimate truth, but we don't have the tools to assess that. Uh, then the third form of truth is it useful? And I really, really like this form of truth because if something is useful, it must be tapping something that's real. So you're getting at something in this second correspondence theory of truth. Um, but it doesn't matter. Like if you can reliably produce results with remote viewing, I don't really care. I mean, I do care out of curiosity how it works, but uh, I'm also okay not ever understanding how it works if it works. But we have to be really rigorous in evaluating whether it works or not.
True. In fact, when I started exploring remote viewing, I was very, skeptic about it. I was like, I come from a psychology background and then I'm getting into this. And, I had seen I had heard all the good stuff and the bad stuff and how, things have been happening since long. And, the aspect of conspiracy theory and, a lot of, BS was also there. I was like, let me not get into it. But, all of a sudden after that sensory deprivation tank experience, something in me really got turned on. I mean, it was like a on off switch. Somebody turned on that switch and I was like, I need to try it out. And then I started doing it. And I mean, it does make sense. There is something I can't put words to it or I can't, explain it in really simple terms. But I think everyone is born with some uniqueness. It's up to us how we explore. But us since childhood, being trained to just rely on our basic five senses, it's something, which cripples us, psychically. It doesn't let us, expand and evolve,
Yeah.
in a lot of other ways. We are just expected to hear. I mean, one interesting thing that I would like to share with you is that, I was earlier staying in a metropolitan city, lots of noise, lots of lights. And then, we, shifted to a mountain, a very remote area on a mountain. Even I, am able to hear, my muscle, twitch. I'm able to hear my, when I turn my head, sometimes I'm able to hear that bone,
Yeah.
turning and making that, creaky noise. Very weird. It gets me goosebumps when I hear that,
Oh, yeah.
when I focus on it. But I mean, again, I was unable to, gauge and perceive those things when I was in a, metropolitan city. But as how, it changed, of course, there must be some geological, aspect to it, or, must be other factors also, but I wasn't aware of it. I
Yeah.
wasn't aware that, my bones make noise and I can hear it.
Yeah.
It's I almost told my husband that are we, getting old? I mean, is it concerning? Are we really turning old, or is our bone becoming mushy and feeble? Do we need to reach out to a doctor? And he said no. And on the flip side, he cannot hear anything. He is absolutely, someone who's there. I mean, he doesn't have these, capabilities, or he is unable to. I mean, he has his own different, a range of, things that he experiences. So I mean, yeah, I mean, if you in a way start controlling, the five, senses, I think you will be able to access the other senses that is there. I don't know how many are there, but yes, there are, which are just not limited to the five basic senses.
Yeah. And maybe everybody's senses get expressed differently. So, like,
Absolutely.
I think, like, I do a lot of risk evaluation for, I have a consulting firm as well. And to me, the risks of sitting in a sensory deprivation, chamber for 20 minutes are almost zero, right? Like it's almost zero risk. And the only risk is really you could be doing something else with that 20 minutes. So, uh, like, why would we tell people not to do that? There's essentially only upside, or maybe it triggers psychosis or something. Who knows? But like, I see it as very, very low risk. So those are the sorts of interventions where, um, can I drink milk? Well, take a little sip of milk and see, and then you've learned something.
True.
And sit in the sensory deprivation chamber and see. And I'm totally going to seek that out. If I can find one around here, maybe I'll have to build one.
Mm-hmm. You should try. I mean, it's really amazing. And after some time, once you're over that phase, I mean, initially, once you're over, it will be like a recreation for you. I mean, for me, rather than going out on Sundays and Saturdays, I prefer, hanging, in that chamber, for half an hour to 45 minutes. That is, something that I wait, anxiously throughout the week. I need to try it out. I need to get in there. And my husband has plans. Let's do this. Let's go out and dine and do this. I'm like, no, let me just do that, and then maybe I can, catch up. So
Yeah.
yeah, it depends. Now, Eric, before we conclude today's podcast, I have a last question for you. I mean, based on my observation, Eric, your institute is doing pioneering work at the intersection of love, time, and science communication, areas which I have not seen being held together by anyone else. I mean, it's only your, work and, Julia's work that I see these things intersecting and coming together. Eric, what paradigm shift do you think is most urgently needed if we are to integrate implicit knowing, trustworthy science, and healing technology into our mainstream culture? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So this is another thing. It's like, what do we focus on the most? And this is when you have an organization full of creative geniuses like Julia. It's which do we pick as the biggest lever that we can pull, because we've got so many ideas. Like, which one do we really want to action on? And what we're really looking at now is providing some more thought leadership around unconditional love. And people like to talk about self-love and empathy and other love and compassion and stuff. We treat it as all the same thing, for the most part, because we're not seeing it as a force that we have a lot of control over. It's more like a force that the control that we have is asking for ourselves to be open to it. I think if people are experiencing unconditional love for themselves, they don't have to compensate for feeling bad about themselves by calling somebody else names on the internet. And then maybe that person's able to experience unconditional love, and they don't call somebody. So it's really, we're trying to really create some ripples, but starting with the individual, maybe redefining what they think of when they think of love. So I typically think of it as more of a force that we can invite in, or we can ignore it. Like we ignore gravity for the most part, but it's still there. But if you learn how gravity works, there's major advantages to that. So we're really starting with unconditional love, and hoping that branches out over time into, people trying out some different healing modalities, and respecting that different modalities are going to work for different people. And if you are loving yourself, you give yourself permission to explore those sorts of modalities. And then, in the social space as well, just hopefully helping to heal, especially with the gazing app, helping to heal some of these rifts that are mostly just based on these abstract ideas of who people have been told they are. And they're not actually using their senses of who they actually are. So I think it's going to be an inward and an outward, but we're really starting with the inward, because that's what you can do in a sort of a commodity culture.
Thank you so much, Eric, for joining in today And I'm looking forward to again invite you for some other interesting topic where we can talk and share our views. So thank you so much, Eric, for joining in today.
Oh, Sarah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.